The whistle of the Hogwarts Express was a sound of profound and complicated nostalgia. For Harry Potter, it was the screeching, steamy fanfare that had first welcomed him home. It was the sound of friendship forged over Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and chocolate frog cards. It was also, he reflected, as he jostled through the throng on platform 9 3/4, the sound of journeys that led to mortal peril, to battles fought in corridors and graveyards, and to a war that had carved scars both seen and unseen into his generation. But this year was supposed to be different. This was the 8th year, a term coined by the ever-practical Minerva McGonagall. It was an unprecedented optional year for any student who had missed their newts due to, as the ministry so delicately put it, the recent unpleasantness. It was a chance for normalcy, a chance to simply be students again. Honestly, Ron, if you just used a shrinking charm on the trunk, you wouldn't be taking out half the platform. Hermione Granger's voice cut through the noise, sharp but fond. She was already in full prefect mode, even though they were no longer prefects. Some habits, Harry supposed, died harder than Dark Lords. Ron Weasley, red-faced and sweating, was wrestling with a trunk that seemed determined to trip every passing first year. Right, because that worked so well for you last time, didn't it? When all your knickers ended up doll-sized for a week. Hermione's cheeks flushed pink. That was a miscalculation in the incantation, and we agreed not to speak of it. Harry grinned, the familiar bickering a comforting balm. He hoisted his own trunk, significantly lighter without the weight of Horcruxes or the sword of Gryffindor, and nudged Ron. Come on, let's find a compartment before they're all taken. I think I saw Ginny get on with Luna and Neville a minute ago. They finally managed to heave their luggage onto the train, the familiar scent of coal smoke, old upholstery, and something vaguely sweet filling Harry's nostrils. The train was packed, a vibrant, chaotic tapestry of black robes, colorful scarves, and hooting owls. They found an empty compartment near the middle of the train, sinking onto the plush crimson seats with collective sighs of relief. The journey began as it always did. The train lurched, then smoothly pulled away from the station, the faces of tearful parents blurring into a watercolor pastiche. London's grey sprawl gave way to rolling green countryside, dotted with sheep that looked like fluffy white boulders. Right then, said Ron, rubbing his hands together. Who's up for a game of exploding snap? In a bit, Hermione said, already having pulled a massive, leather-bound tome from her beaded bag. Its title was Advanced Arithmancy, Beyond the Prime Numbers. I just want to get a head start on Professor Vector's preliminary reading. Ron rolled his eyes at Harry, who shrugged. Some things truly never changed. Harry, for his part, simply wanted to look out the window. He wanted to enjoy the simple, unadulterated pleasure of a train ride to school, a luxury he hadn't truly experienced since his first year. The compartment door slid open and Neville Longbottom poked his head in. His face, once round and perpetually worried, was now leaner, framed by a newfound confidence. The Battle of Hogwarts had reforged him. Harry, Ron, Hermione, good to see you all. Listen, you haven't seen Trevor, have you? I swear he was in my pocket a minute ago. A wave of amused affection washed over Harry. No, Neville. Haven't seen him. But you know he'll turn up. He always does. Neville sighed, a shadow of his old self flitting across his features. Yeah, I suppose. Just force of habit, asking. I'll check with the first years. They always seem to find him in the licorice wands. He gave a small wave and disappeared. Poor Neville, Hermione murmured, not looking up from her book. You'd think after all this time, he'd have found a spell to keep track of that toad. Where's the fun in that? Ron countered, finally pulling out his deck of exploding snap cards. It's a Hogwarts tradition, Neville loses Trevor. An hour or so into the journey, the familiar rattle of the trolley heralded the arrival of the smiling, dimpled witch. Anything off the trolley, dears? She asked, her voice the same warm, crinkly sound it had been for 7 years. Packet of drubels and a licorice wand, said Ron, digging in his pockets for some sickles. I'll have a cauldron cake, please, said Hermione, momentarily abandoning arithmancy for sugar. Just a pumpkin pasty for me, Harry said. As he paid, he noticed a strange object on the bottom shelf of her trolley, tucked away behind the chocolate frogs. It was a small, ornate silver pocket watch, its surface covered in interlocking runes he didn't recognize. It wasn't ticking with a steady rhythm. Instead, it seemed to pulse with a soft, internal light, and the ticking sound was erratic, like a fluttering heartbeat. "What's that watch?" Harry asked, pointing. The trolley which glanced down, her smile unwavering. "Oh, just a little trinket, dear. A family heirloom. Keeps terrible time, but it's pretty, isn't it?" She didn't offer to show it to him, and the trolley rattled on down the corridor. Harry thought it was odd, but the thought was fleeting, quickly replaced by the familiar, comforting taste of the pumpkin pasty. The day wore on. They talked about Quidditch. Ginny was a shoo-in for Chaser, and Ron was considering trying out for Keeper again. They discussed the new defense against the dark arts professor, an Auror named Elias Thorne who had supposedly dueled with Antonin Dolohov and won. Hermione eventually put her book away, and they played a few rounds of exploding snap that left Ron with singed eyebrows. Ginny stopped by, her fiery hair beacon in the corridor. She stole a kiss from Harry that tasted of sugar quills and left him feeling warmer than any cauldron cake. As late afternoon bled into evening, the sky outside the window turned a spectacular shade of bruised purple and fiery orange. The train was crossing a long, arching viaduct over a deep, misty valley. Harry was watching the sun dip below a distant hill, a perfect, glowing orb of red. And then it happened. It wasn't an explosion. There was no sound, no impact. It was a cessation of everything. One moment he was watching the sunset, the next, a silent, blindingly white light filled the compartment, the world, his entire consciousness. It wasn't painful, but it was absolute. The feeling of the train's motion vanished. The low murmur of conversation, the rumble of the wheels, the scent of smoke, all of it was erased. He had a bizarre, fleeting sensation of falling, not downwards, but inwards, as if he were collapsing into himself. Then, darkness. Harry's eyes snapped open. He was jolted, not by a sound, but by a sudden, violent lurch. He was sitting on the crimson seat of a compartment on the Hogwarts Express. Sunlight streamed through the window. Across from him, Ron was saying, taking out half the platform. Hermione, looking exasperated, was retorting, "Honestly, Ron, if you just used a shrinking charm." Harry blinked. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady rhythm of the train. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, the kind that came from waking from an intensely vivid dream. The white light, the falling. "You all right, mate?" Ron asked, finally managing to shove his trunk under the seat. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Yeah, I'm fine," Harry stammered, shaking his head to clear it. "Just weird dream." For a second there, he tried to dismiss it. Post-traumatic stress, perhaps? He'd had his share of nightmares and flashbacks. Maybe he just dozed off for a moment. The train pulled out of the station. The journey began. London gave way to the countryside. "Right then," said Ron, rubbing his hands together. "Who's up for a game of exploding snap?" A prickle of unease, cold and sharp, traced its way up Harry's spine. "In a bit," Hermione said, pulling out advanced arithmancy, beyond the prime numbers. "I just want to get a head start." Harry stared at her. It was the same book, the same words. He felt a dizzying wave of déjà vu so powerful it was almost nauseating. It was more than familiar, it was a perfect, crystalline echo. He waited, his breath held. The compartment door slid open. Neville Longbottom poked his head in. "Harry." "Ron, Hermione. Good to see you all. Listen, you haven't seen Trevor, have you?" Harry's blood ran cold. This wasn't déjà vu. This was wrong. "No, Neville," he said, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "He'll turn up." "Yeah, I suppose," Neville sighed and left. "Poor Neville," Hermione murmured, her eyes on her book. "Where's the fun in that?" Ron said. "It's a Hogwarts tradition, Neville loses Trevor." Harry felt like he was going to be sick. He stood up, his legs unsteady. "I need some air." He slid the compartment door open and stumbled into the corridor. He leaned against the window, pressing his forehead to the cool glass. He could see his own reflection, pale, wide-eyed, his scar a stark slash against his skin. This was impossible. It had to be a dream, a trick of the mind. He stayed in the corridor for what felt like an hour, watching the identical scenery roll by, his mind racing. He was trying to find a flaw, a difference, something to prove he wasn't going mad. He saw nothing. He returned to the compartment just as the trolley was approaching. The same dimpled witch. The same warm smile. "Anything off the trolley, dears?" Harry's heart was pounding. This is the test, he thought. This will prove it. Packet of dribbles and a licorice wand, said Ron. Cauldron cake, please, said Hermione. Harry's mouth was dry. A pumpkin pasty, he managed to say. As he paid, he looked down. And there it was. Tucked behind the chocolate frogs on the bottom shelf was the ornate, runic pocket watch, pulsing with its soft, erratic light. He felt a jolt, as if he'd touched a live wire. It was real. It was all real. He hadn't dreamed it. He sat through the rest of the journey in a daze. He couldn't bring himself to play Exploding Snap. He barely registered Ginny's visit, mumbling a greeting when she kissed him. He just watched the clock on the wall, a cheap, functional thing provided by the railway. He watched as the hands crept towards late afternoon. The sky began to turn purple and orange. The train moved onto the long, arching viaduct. Harry braced himself, his hands gripping the edge of his seat. He looked out the window. The sun was a perfect, glowing orb of red dipping below the distant hill. And then the silent, blinding white light. The cessation of everything. The inward fall. Darkness. He was jolted awake by the lurch of the train. Sunlight. Ron was wrestling with his trunk, taking out half the platform. No! Harry yelled, scrambling to his feet. Ron and Hermione stared at him, startled into silence. Harry? What in Merlin's name is wrong with you? Ron asked, looking genuinely concerned. It's happening again, Harry said, his voice cracking. He was frantic, pacing the small compartment like a caged animal. The day. It's starting over. We just did this. You said that. Hermione said the thing about the shrinking charm. Neville is going to come in here and ask about Trevor in about 5 minutes. Mate, you need to calm down, Ron said, holding his hands up placatingly. You're not making any sense. We just got on the train. No, we didn't. We've been on this train for hours. Twice. This is the third time. Harry ran a hand through his already messy hair. His mind a maelstrom of panic. It ends. When the sun sets over the viaduct, everything goes white. And then I wake up back here, at the start of the journey. Hermione had closed her book and was looking at him with an expression of deep worry. Harry, listen to me. The war, it was a lot. Maybe you're just exhausted. Your mind is playing tricks on you. It's not a trick, he insisted, his voice rising in desperation. I can prove it. Ron, in your pocket you have 3 sickles and a canute you forgot about. And a ball of lint. Hermione, you're going to open your book to page 17 and underline the 3rd paragraph with a self-inking quill. Ron, looking bewildered, checked his pockets. He pulled out the coins and a small, gray puff of lint. His jaw dropped. Hermione, a flicker of doubt in her eyes, opened her arithmancy book. She hesitated, then flipped to page 17. She stared at the 3rd paragraph. Before she could do anything, the compartment door slid open. Neville. Hi everyone, he began. You haven't seen Trevor, have you? Harry pointed a trembling finger at him. See? I told you. Neville looked from Harry's wild expression to Ron's stunned face and Hermione's now pale one. Is this a bad time? No, Neville, sorry, Hermione said quickly, her voice a little shaky. We haven't. Check with the first years. Neville backed away slowly and vanished. Hermione looked at Harry, then at Ron, then back at Harry. The clinical, analytical part of her mind was clearly at war with her concern for her friend's sanity. Harry, how could you possibly know that? Because I've lived it. Twice. It could be a coincidence, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. A lucky guess. Déjà vu is a known psychological phenomenon. Was Ron's pocket lint a psychological phenomenon? Harry shot back. Was Neville losing his toad at the exact same moment a coincidence? Don't you see? We're trapped. We're in a loop. Ron was still staring at the lint in his palm as if it were a dark artifact. That's properly weird. A time loop, Hermione breathed, the words heavy with academic fascination and terror. Theoretically possible, of course. Temporal paradoxes are a major field in advanced magical theory, but they're almost entirely hypothetical. The energy required to sustain one would be colossal. And to trap a moving object like a train, she shook her head. It's unheard of. Well, the unheard of is happening, Harry said, feeling a small measure of relief that she was at least considering it. We have to do something. We have to change it. This time, Harry was a man on a mission. He refused to let the day play out. He bought a different snack from the trolley, which deliberately making small talk with her, trying to get another look at the watch. She was polite but evasive, deftly maneuvering the trolley so the watch was always just out of sight. He convinced Ron not to play Exploding Snap. Instead, they played chess. Ron beat him soundly in 3 games, but it felt like a small victory, a deviation from the script. He intercepted Neville in the corridor before he could reach their compartment. Neville, Trevor's in with the first years, near the licorice wands. A little girl with blonde pigtails found him. Neville stared at him, astonished. "How did you?" "Thanks, Harry." He scurried off, looking relieved. Harry felt a surge of triumph. He was changing things. He was breaking the pattern. He spent the rest of the afternoon feeling cautiously optimistic. He even enjoyed his conversation with Ginny, feeling more present this time. But as evening approached, a familiar dread began to creep back in. The train moved onto the viaduct. The sky turned the same shade of purple and orange. "It doesn't matter what we do, does it?" Ron said quietly, watching the dread on Harry's face. Harry didn't answer. He just watched the sun dip below the hill. The white light. The fall. The darkness. The lurch. The sunlight. Ron and his trunk. Harry didn't even speak this time. He just slammed his fist into the seat cushion, a guttural sound of pure frustration escaping his lips. "Okay," he said, his voice low and strained. "Okay. Panic isn't working. Small changes aren't working. We need a new plan." He looked directly at Hermione. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to need you to believe me from the start this time. I don't have the energy to convince you again." For a loop to be useful, he needed his friends. He couldn't do this alone. The isolation was as maddening as the repetition. He spent the first 10 minutes of the journey in a breathless, rapid-fire monologue, predicting every single micro-event he could remember. "Ron, you're about to say it's a Hogwarts tradition that Neville loses Trevor. Hermione, your quill is going to blot on the word isomorphism. A first year in the next compartment is going to drop a glass bottle of Skillgrow, and we'll hear the smash in about 3 to 1 inch. A distinct crash echoed from down the corridor. Hermione's book fell into her lap. Ron's jaw was hanging open. "Merlin's beard," Ron whispered. Hermione's eyes, wide with a mixture of awe and horror, met Harry's. "I believe you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Harry, I believe you. What do we do?" Finally, he had his team. "Right," Harry said, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "This is an investigation. The loop resets at a specific time and place, sunset on the viaduct. Something on this train is causing it. An artifact, a person, a curse, something. We need to find it." "The energy source," Hermione said, her mind already working at lightning speed. "It has to have a source. An anchor. It can't be the train itself. The magic would have dissipated. It has to be a discrete object." "The watch," Harry said immediately. "The trolley witch. She has this weird pocket watch. It doesn't tick right." "A watch," Hermione mused. "A timepiece. It's the most logical place to start. A corrupted time-turner, perhaps? Or something older." "So what's the plan?" Ron asked, looking from Harry to Hermione. "We just go up and snatch it from her?" "No," Hermione said, shaking her head. "We need to be systematic. This loop is a resource. We have unlimited chances to get this right, but only 1 chance per loop. We can't afford to be reckless. A direct confrontation might backfire, especially if she's the one controlling it." "So, loop for reconnaissance," Harry declared, the name sounding absurd and military, but it helped him feel a sliver of control. "We split up. We learn the train. Every compartment. Every person. We map it. Ron, you take the front carriages. I'll take the back. Hermione, you do the Hermione thing." "The library," she said with a grim nod, pulling a dozen shrunken books from her bag. "I'll cross-reference everything I can find on temporal magic, runic arrays, and cursed artifacts. There must be a counterspell or a containment procedure." They synchronized their cheap wristwatches, a habit from their Horcrux hunting days. Harry's journey through the rear carriages was a surreal experience. He was a ghost, observing the same vignettes of life play out again and again. He saw Cho Chang sitting with Marietta Edgecombe, both looking subdued. He saw a group of Hufflepuffs enchanting a deck of cards to sing bawdy sea shanties. He saw Seamus and Dean arguing about the best Tuchel Tornadoes chaser of the last decade. He made notes on a piece of parchment. Who was where? Who was talking to whom? Anything that seemed out of place. The only thing that truly stood out was a pale, quiet boy in a Slytherin robe sitting alone in the very last compartment, staring blankly out the window. Harry recognized him vaguely. A sixth-year named Terence Higgs, though he looked thinner and more haunted than Harry remembered. Ron's report was similar. Lots of first years, a few Ravenclaws debating logic puzzles, and, most notably, Draco Malfoy. He's in a compartment with Pansy Parkinson and Blaise Zabini, Ron reported back, his mouth set in a thin line. Not saying much. Just staring at his hands. Looks like a right git, same as always. Could he be involved? Harry wondered aloud. Malfoy was always a tempting suspect. He's capable of it, Ron grumbled. But is he? Hermione interjected, looking up from a scroll titled The Paradoxes of Praxinus. Think about it. Malfoy is on probation. He's being watched by the Ministry. Would he really risk something this audacious, this pointless? What would be his motive for trapping a train full of students in a time loop? She had a point. It didn't fit. It felt more chaotic, less malicious. As sunset approached, they met back in their compartment, their parchments full of notes but no concrete answers. Nothing, Harry said in frustration. It's just a normal train ride, except for the fact that it never ends. There's always tomorrow, Ron said, then grimaced. Or today again. You know what I mean. The white light came. The fall. The darkness. Lurch? Sunlight. Ron. Trunk. Loop 5, Harry said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Let's talk to people. This time, their approach was different. They used Harry's foreknowledge to their advantage. Harry approached Luna Lovegood, who was humming to herself in a compartment filled with the scent of dried Gertie roots. Luna, he said, sitting opposite her. Hello, Harry, she said, her dreamy eyes focusing on him. The Raxperts around you are particularly agitated today. They're buzzing in circles. Luna, I need to ask you something strange. Do you ever feel like this day has happened before? She tilted her head, her long blonde hair shimmering. All days have happened before, in a way. Time isn't a straight line, you know. It's all crumpled, like a piece of parchment you've stuffed in your pocket. Sometimes you unfold it and read the same sentence twice. It was the most Luna-esque and most helpful thing anyone had said to him all day. What if you were stuck on one sentence? Harry pressed. Reading it over and over? Luna's smile was serene. Then you'd have to look for the ink blot. The little thing that isn't part of the words. The thing that doesn't belong. The ink blot. The watch. Meanwhile, Ron, under Hermione's strict instructions, attempted to engage the trolley witch. That's a fascinating watch, he said, trying to sound casual as he bought 3 chocolate frogs. Family heirloom, you said? That's right, dear, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. She seemed to tense up, her hand hovering protectively over the trolley's handle. Can I see it? Ron asked. Oh, I couldn't. It's very fragile. Now, will that be all? Her tone was firm, shutting down the conversation. She moved off down the corridor more briskly than before. She's hiding something, Ron reported back. Clammed up the second I asked about the watch. Hermione, meanwhile, had found something. It's obscure, really obscure. In a footnote in Chronos Unchained. Talks about temporal anchors. Objects that can be imbued with chronomantic energy to create a localized, recursive temporal field. But it's incredibly dangerous, unstable magic. The book calls it a fool's gambit. It says the anchor is often tied to a powerful, recurring memory or an intense emotional state of the caster. The loop feeds on the emotion. Emotion. Memory. The trolley witch had called the watch a family heirloom. What memory was so powerful she would trap a train for it? Okay. Loop 6 is going to be different, Harry said as they huddled together, the viaduct looming in the distance. We need to get that watch. Not aggressively. We need to trick her. Distract her. One of us creates a diversion at the front of the trolley, the other 2 approach from the back. We just need to get our hands on it, see what it is. It was a solid plan. It felt proactive. Felt like they were finally on the verge of a breakthrough. The sun dipped below the horizon. The white light. The fall. The darkness. Lurch. Sunlight. I'm getting really sick of this view, Ron grumbled, not even bothering to look out the window. Loop 6, Harry said, rubbing his eyes. The plan is the same. Diversion and acquisition. Let's go over the details again. They spent the first hour meticulously planning. Ron, being the most disarming, would cause the diversion. He would pretend to have an allergic reaction to a Bertie Bott's bean, causing a commotion. While the witch was distracted, Harry and Hermione would approach from the other end of the carriage where she'd already passed. Hermione would use a simple levitation charm, Wingardium Leviosa, to lift the watch, and Harry would catch it. Simple. Clean. They executed it flawlessly. Ron's performance of choking on a bogey-flavored bean was a masterpiece of dramatic coughing and spluttering, drawing the attention of half the carriage. The trolley witch fussed over him, offering him a glass of water. Harry and Hermione crept up to the unattended trolley. The silver watch was there, pulsing its strange, soft light. Now, Harry whispered. Hermione drew her wand. Her expression one of fierce concentration. Wingardium Leviosa. The watch lifted gently from its velvet cushion. It floated through the air towards them, spinning slowly. Harry reached out, his fingers just inches away from the cool metal. He could feel a strange energy emanating from it, a low hum that vibrated in his teeth. And then all hell broke loose. The moment the watch left the trolley's proximity, the train gave a violent, sickening shudder, far worse than the initial lurch. The lights in the carriage flickered and died, plunging them into semi-darkness, lit only by the emergency lights in the ceiling. Outside the windows, the sunny green countryside dissolved into a chaotic, swirling vortex of color and shadow. A wave of magical force erupted from the watch, throwing Harry and Hermione backward. Harry hit the opposite wall hard, his head cracking against the wood paneling. The watch clattered to the floor, not with a metallic clang, but with a horrifying sound like shattering crystal. The trolley witch spun around, her face no longer smiling and dimpled. It was a mask of pure fury and panic. "What have you done?" she shrieked, her voice unnaturally loud, echoing through the now silent carriage. The erratic ticking from the fallen watch sped up, becoming a frantic, deafening roar. The floor of the train began to vibrate violently. Cracks of golden light spiderwebbed across the runic surface of the watch. Harry, his vision swimming, saw the world outside the window fracture. He saw the viaduct at sunset, the platform at King's Cross, the dark, rain-lashed grounds of Hogwarts, all flashing in and out of existence in a dizzying, impossible montage. The very fabric of their reality on the train was tearing apart. Hermione, scrambling to her feet, pointed her wand at the fractured watch. Finite incantatem. The spell fizzled out a foot from the object, absorbed by the temporal chaos. The roar from the watch grew into a piercing, high-pitched scream. Harry felt that strange, inward-falling sensation again, but this time it was violent, terrifying. It felt like being ripped apart atom by atom. The golden cracks on the watch spread, consuming it entirely, and then a wave of pure, silent, white energy exploded outwards, far more powerful than the gentle reset light he was used to. This wasn't the loop resetting. This was a breaking. And as the white oblivion consumed him, Harry's last, terrifying thought was that he had not fixed the loop. He had just doomed them all to whatever lay on the other side of a shattered timeline. The return to consciousness was not the familiar, jarring lurch of the train leaving the station. It was a slow, syrupy drift from a place of absolute nothingness. Harry felt as though he were swimming up through a thick, cold sea. There was no sound, no light, only a profound sense of disorientation and a throbbing ache in the back of his head. He forced his eyes open. He was lying on the floor of the train corridor. The emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows, flickering erratically. The train was unnervingly still and silent. The comforting rumble of the wheels, the hiss of steam, the distant murmur of voices all gone. It was like being in a tomb. "Hermione," he croaked, his voice rough. He pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. "Ron." A groan came from nearby. Hermione was slumped against the wall, her wand still clutched in her hand. "Harry, what happened?" "The watch, it broke." "I'm here," Ron's voice called out, shaky but blessedly familiar. He was a few feet away, disentangling himself from a pile of what looked like spilled pumpkin pasties. What in the name of Godric's Gryffindor was that? Felt like being spattergrafted and put through a blender. They gathered together in the flickering gloom, a small island of bewildered humanity in the dead silence. The trolley lay on its side, its contents strewn across the floor. Of the trolley witch there was no sign. She had simply vanished. Is it over? Ron asked, his eyes wide. Did we break it? I don't think break is the right word, Hermione said, her voice trembling slightly as she scanned their surroundings. Look, she was pointing at the window. Harry moved towards it, his heart sinking with a dreadful premonition. The view outside was no longer the English countryside nor the swirling vortex of chaos. It was a static, impossible image. On one side of the train, a perpetual, silent sunset over the viaduct was frozen in time. The sun a perfect, unmoving orb of red. On the other side, the bustling platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross was equally still, parents frozen mid-wave, steam hanging in the air like solid clouds. It's stuck, Harry whispered. We haven't broken the loop. We've broken the time. Hermione nodded, her face pale with dawning horror. By trying to remove the temporal anchor from its established field, we didn't dissipate the magic. We destabilized it catastrophically. The loop didn't end, it shattered. We're no longer looping through a day. We're trapped in the wreckage of it. We're in a bubble of fractured chronology, suspended between the start and end of the loop. So what you're saying is, Ron translated, his face grim, we've gone from being stuck on repeat to being stuck on pause? Worse, Hermione corrected. We're stuck in a place where the laws of time and physics are fraying. This train is no longer in the real world. It's an echo, a memory floating in a temporal void. As if to punctuate her point, the corridor ahead of them seemed to shimmer and stretch, the far end elongating to an impossible distance for a moment before snapping back to its normal size with a silent, visual thwomp. A door to one of the compartments slid open and Neville Longbottom stumbled out, his face a mask of confusion. What's going on? The train had stopped. Soon, others began to emerge. Ginny, Luna, Seamus, Dean, even a bewildered-looking Draco Malfoy, who stepped out of his compartment with an expression of aristocratic disdain that failed to mask his fear. The entire population of the train seemed to be stirring, waking up from the same forced unconsciousness. They were all trapped. Panic began to ripple through the carriages as people realized the stillness, the silent, impossible views outside. A few first-years started to cry. Everyone, stay calm, Harry shouted, his voice echoing unnaturally in the silence. All eyes turned to him. The boy who lived. The savior. The one who was supposed to have answers. He felt a familiar, heavy weight settle on his shoulders. Hermione, Ron, with me, he said quietly. We need to find the source. The watch is broken, but the magic is still here. It has to be anchored to something else now. Or someone. The caster, Hermione said, her eyes lighting up with grim understanding. The book said the anchor is often tied to the caster's emotional state. When the artifact broke, the magic might have defaulted. Latched onto the person who created the loop in the first place. The trolley witch, Ron said. But she's gone. Is she? Harry asked. Or did she just change? Their investigation began anew, but this time it was infinitely more perilous. The train was no longer a stable environment. Corridors would randomly dead-end into solid walls of polished wood that hadn't been there a moment before. Compartments would open onto other, identical compartments in a disorienting, repeating pattern. Time was inconsistent. Harry would glance at his watch and see the hands spinning wildly. Then look again and see they hadn't moved at all. They had to navigate not just the physical space but the temporal instability. They saw fleeting, ghostly images flicker in the corridors, a younger version of the trolley witch laughing with a small boy who wore a Hogwarts scarf, a flash of the Battle of Hogwarts, silent and terrifying, the train chugging through a blizzard. The memories that powered the loop were bleeding through into their reality. We're looking for someone who doesn't belong, Harry said, repeating Luna's earlier advice. Or someone who is the absolute center of all this strangeness. They decided to search for the trolley witch's living quarters, assuming she had them somewhere on the train. They found them at the very front of the train, near the engine room. It was a small, neat cabin. And it was here they found their first real clue. On a small bedside table was a framed photograph. It showed the smiling, dimpled trolley witch, but she looked younger, wearing normal witch's robes instead of her uniform. Her arm was around a young boy of about 11, with bright, cheerful eyes and a messy mop of brown hair. He was beaming, proudly holding up a letter sealed with the Hogwarts crest. Tucked into the frame of the photo was a small, yellowed newspaper clipping from the Daily Prophet. The headline read, Hogwarts Student Among the Fallen. The small photo accompanying the article was of the same boy from the picture. His name was Leo. He had been a third-year Hufflepuff killed by a stray curse during the final battle. Her son, Hermione whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Ron stared at the photo. She wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She was just trying to see him again. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The loop wasn't malicious. It was born of grief. The Hogwarts Express journey on September 1st was probably a cherished memory for her son's first trip to school. Or perhaps their last happy one together. She had used the temporal anchor, that dangerous family heirloom, to try and relive that one perfect day. A day before the war, before the loss. But the magic was too powerful, too unstable. She hadn't just relived it, she had trapped everyone else inside it with her. When the watch broke, Harry pieced together the magic, tied to her grief, latched onto her directly. It consumed her, maybe? Or transformed her. She's the anchor now. Her physical body. So we have to find her, Ron said. And do what? We can't just attack a grieving mum. No, Harry said, his mind racing. He thought of his own parents, of Sirius, of Lupin. He understood grief. He knew it couldn't be fought with spells. We don't fight her. We talk to her. We have to convince her to let go. But how do you find someone who has become the linchpin of a collapsing reality? It was Luna who gave them the answer. They found her in the library car carriage that hadn't existed in the loops but was now present, its books all blank. She was sitting cross-legged on a table, staring at a single, shimmering point in the air. The knots are all pulled tight here, she said, without turning around. All the strings lead to the same place. Can't you feel it? Harry focused, trying to sense what Luna did. He closed his eyes, pushing past the visual chaos of the flickering lights and stretching corridors. He tried to feel the magic of the train, the raw, unstable power that permeated everything. And he felt it. A low, constant thrum of energy like a deep bass note. And it was strongest in one particular direction. Towards the back of the train. The engine room, Harry said. No, the other way. The luggage car. The journey to the rear of the train was the most harrowing yet. They had to navigate a corridor where gravity kept shifting, forcing them to walk on the walls and ceiling. They passed through a carriage that was submerged in silent, breathable water, ghostly fish swimming through the seats. They saw their own reflections in the windows, but the reflections were older, then younger, then gone altogether. Finally, they reached the heavy door of the luggage car. The thrum of power was immense here, making the very air vibrate. Harry pushed the door open. The sight that greeted them was something out of a nightmare born of sorrow. The luggage car was a maelstrom of temporal energy. Trunks and all cages floated in midair, spinning slowly. In the center of the cavernous space floated the trolley witch. But it was and wasn't her. She was translucent, a figure woven from memory and light. Around her, scenes from her life with her son flickered and swirled like a phantom cinema. Leo on a broomstick, wobbling but laughing. Leo opening presents on Christmas morning. Leo waving goodbye from the Hogwarts Express. And then the images turned darker. A flash of green light. A silent scream. The empty seat at her kitchen table. Her eyes were closed. Her face a serene mask of denial. She was lost in her perfect, looped memory, oblivious to the chaos she had created, a prisoner of her own making. The raw, untamed magic poured from her, holding the fractured reality of the train together. How do we even get near her? Ron breathed, shielding his eyes from the swirling lights. Any spell we cast will just be absorbed by that storm, Hermione said, her voice tight with awe and fear. It's pure, primal magic. Grief-given form. Harry looked at the floating figure, at the endless, repeating cycle of love and loss that surrounded her. He knew what he had to do. Brute force was useless. Spells were useless. This wasn't a problem a wizard could solve. It was a problem a human had to. I'm going in, Harry said. Harry, no. It'll tear you apart. Hermione cried, grabbing his arm. She's lost in a memory, Harry said, his gaze fixed on the witch. I'm the only one here who can understand what that's like. To want to live in the past with the people you've lost. I have to try to reach her. He looked at his friends. Just keep everyone else back. Give me some time. He gently removed Hermione's hand from his arm, gave Ron a firm nod, and took a step into the luggage car. The moment he crossed the threshold, the energy hit him. It was a physical force. A gale of sorrow and regret that threatened to bowl him over. His own memories, his own losses rose up to meet the storm. He saw his mother's face as she begged Voldemort for his life. He saw Sirius falling through the veil. He saw Dumbledore's body at the foot of the astronomy tower. He saw Fred's lifeless eyes staring at the ceiling of the Great Hall. The grief was a siren song, tempting him to sink into his own past, to join the witch in her self-imposed prison of memory. He fought it, gritting his teeth, forcing himself to put one foot in front of the other. The air was thick with power, crackling against his skin. He felt like he was wading through molasses. "My name is Harry Potter," he called out, his voice barely a whisper against the phantom roar. He had to push the sound out with his own magic, with his own will. "I know what you're feeling." The figure of the witch didn't respond, but the swirling images around her faltered for a second. The image of her son waving from the train lingered, stuttering like a damaged film. Harry pushed forward, step by agonizing step. He was in the eye of the storm now, just feet from her. He could see the tears tracing silent paths down her translucent cheeks. "You created this world to be with him," Harry said, his voice stronger now, filled with an empathy that was raw and painful. "A perfect day. A day where he's safe. Where he's still here. I understand. Believe me, I understand more than anyone." He thought of the mirror of Eriste, of the resurrection stone. He had been tempted by the same ghosts. "But this isn't real," he continued, his voice gentle but firm. "This beautiful memory you've built, it's a cage. Not just for you, but for everyone on this train. For all these children who have their own lives to live, their own memories to make." The image of Leo flickered violently. The witch's serene expression cracked, showing a fissure of pain. A low moan, the first sound she had made, echoed through the car. The floating trunks began to wobble. "His name was Leo," Harry said, remembering the newspaper clipping. "He was a Hufflepuff. He was brave. He died fighting for a better world. A world where people could be safe. A world that you've put on pause." He was taking a huge risk, forcing her to confront the truth she had warped reality to escape. The energy storm around them intensified. A wave of force slammed into Harry, and he staggered, crying out as the image of Cedric Diggory's dead eyes flashed before him. He fell to one knee, the weight of his own grief threatening to crush him. "You can't stay here," he gasped, forcing himself back up. This prison of a perfect day, it dishonors his memory. He didn't die so you could stop living. He died so others could live. He looked straight at her closed eyes, pouring all his own pain, his own acceptance, his own hard-won peace into his gaze. "You have to let him go," Harry said, his voice breaking with the weight of the words. "You have to let us go. It's the only way. It's what he would want." For a long moment, there was nothing. Just the silent, swirling storm of memories. Then, slowly, miraculously, the witch's eyes opened. They weren't the blank, serene orbs of before. They were clear, and they were filled with an ocean of unspeakable pain. She looked at Harry, truly seeing him for the first time. She saw not the savior of the wizarding world, but a boy who wore loss like a second skin. She saw understanding. A single, translucent tear rolled down her cheek and fell. When it hit the floor of the car, it didn't splash. It sizzled, and a wave of pure, calming blue energy pulsed outwards. The phantom images of her son began to fade. The final image to remain was of Leo, smiling, waving from the train. The witch reached a shimmering hand out to him, her expression one of heartbreaking love and finality. "Goodbye, my love," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of leaves. The image of her son smiled one last time, then dissolved into motes of golden light. As the last mote faded, the witch herself began to dissolve. The temporal energy, its anchor of grief now released, had nowhere to go. She looked at Harry, a look of profound, silent gratitude on her face. Then she too disintegrated into a cascade of gentle, golden light that flowed outwards, washing through the luggage car. The violent thrumming ceased. The floating trunks and cages clattered to the floor. The chaotic energy storm vanished, replaced by a sudden, profound silence. Harry stood there, breathing heavily, drenched in sweat, utterly drained. The blue and golden light from the luggage car flowed through the rest of the train like a gentle tide. As it passed, the temporal anomalies corrected themselves. The stretched corridors snapped back to their proper dimensions. The water-filled carriage became dry. The flickering lights steadied. In the corridor, Ron and Hermione watched in awe as the impossible, frozen views outside the windows finally came unstuck. The static image of King's Cross dissolved and the static sunset over the viaduct faded. They were replaced by the familiar sight of the Scottish Highlands rolling by, the sky a gentle blue of late afternoon. The gentle rumble of the wheels returned. The hiss of the engine started up again. The Hogwarts Express was moving. It was whole. It was real. A collective gasp went through the students. They were safe. Harry stumbled out of the luggage car, leaning heavily against the doorframe. Ron and Hermione rushed to his side, supporting him. "You did it," Hermione said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Harry, you did it." "I just talked to her," Harry said, exhausted. The rest of the journey was quiet and subdued. A story was quickly and vaguely agreed upon. A major magical malfunction in an old train car had caused a temporary spatial and temporal distortion which had now been contained. It was close enough to the truth. McGonagall would need the real story, of course, but for now it was enough. Malfoy, surprisingly, kept his mouth shut. Harry caught his eye once down the corridor. The Slytherin gave him a brief, almost imperceptible nod, an expression of something that might have been grudging respect, before turning away. As the sun began to set for real, casting long, golden shadows across the glens, Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat in their compartment. The sky turned purple and orange, the same colors that had once heralded the reset. But this time there was no dread. It was just beautiful. The train slowed as it pulled into Hogsmeade Station. The familiar sight of the platform, the waiting horseless carriages, and Hagrid's massive, lamplit silhouette was the most welcome thing Harry had ever seen. The whistle blew, a long, mournful, and beautiful sound signaling the end of the journey. They had stepped onto the train that morning as students returning for a year of peace. They had been trapped, tested, and nearly broken by a monster born not of hatred but of love and loss. They had survived not with powerful hexes or clever counter-curses but with empathy. As Harry stepped off the train and onto the solid ground of the platform, breathing in the cool, pine-scented air of the Highlands, he felt a profound sense of closure. The war had left them with ghosts, and today they had finally helped one find her peace. He looked at his friends, their faces illuminated by the station's warm light, and he knew this year really would be different. They were older now, not just in years, but in wisdom. The journey was over, but they were finally ready to begin.